Dietrich von Hildebrand was a Bavarian, born of a very well-known sculptor, Adolf von Hildebrand, who died in the early 1920s. Von Hildebrand was himself born in Florence because of the fact that as a sculptor, his father had very close contacts with Italy. But then he studied in Munich and then taught there. But then because of the arrival on the scene of the Nazis, he had to leave Germany, and he was hired by Engelbert Dollfuss, who was the head of the Catholic Party in Austria, to teach at the University of Vienna. Dollfuss himself was assassinated by the Nazis in 1934, but von Hildebrand stayed on there. However, when the Anschluss took place in 1938, he had to flee again, and then he went to France. But then with the onslaught of the Second World War in 1940, he had to get out of France as well, and then was brought to the United States with the aid of certain philanthropic organizations. He got a job at Fordham University, but von Hildebrand was known as an anti-Thomist. He was not himself a Thomist philosopher, but a follower of one of the schools of phenomenology. And that meant that he was in the midst of all of this squabbling philosophically. And I myself, not being a philosopher, never really fully understood all of the battles that took place. But I do know that there were battles. And as a consequence of these battles, many people who were on the anti-phenomenological and Thomist side of the picture took it for granted that von Hildebrand must himself, because of their disapproval of his philosophy, that he must himself be in some way a progressive, which turned out not to be the case at all. And it's this fact that he was indeed such a firm defender of the fullness of the Catholic faith that he came to found, with a number of other teachers at Fordham, what became the Roman Forum. At Fordham University, it was Dietrich von Hildebrand, one of his most prized pupils, Dr. William Mara, and then another supporter of von Hildebrand, a Jesuit, Father Vincent Michelli. Another member of the founding group was von Hildebrand's second wife, Alice von Hildebrand, who was another of his pupils. But she did not teach at Fordham. She taught at Hunter College, part of the City College system. In any case, as von Hildebrand himself, when the council was called, was very hopeful and very enthusiastic about what might come out of this. But when he saw the unfolding of the council, he became more and more frightened at the storm that was being unleashed. And I believe, I'm not absolutely quite certain, but I think the first book of his that came out about what was going on at the council was The Trojan Horse in the City of God. The reality of the rebellion that was taking place became crystal clear to him, as well as to so many others, with the open opposition to Pope Paul VI's encyclical letter, Humanae Vitae. When that appeared, and that rebellion appeared even before the encyclical was released, von Hildebrand, with his allies there, decided that they had to do something in order to counter this. And as a result of that, it was specifically to defend Humanae Vitae that the Roman Forum was founded. And it was given this name, the Roman Forum, in order to allow it to talk about what all of the founders considered to be absolutely necessary to the defense of the Roman Catholic faith. And that was everything that was associated with the classical culture, the Greco-Roman classical culture, stretching back to the period before Christianity as well. So it was meant to allow them to talk using both philosophical, well, I shouldn't say both, but philosophical, broadly cultural, and then clearly Catholic, specifically Catholic and Roman Catholic influences. Now, Humanae Vitae, as was already clear in von Hildebrand's mind, was something connected with a rebellion that extended to practically an assault on every aspect of the Catholic faith. So the Roman Forum, meeting in Fordham University, it met regularly from its outset. I can't remember if I think the first meeting was in 1969. It was clearly going to be dedicated to defending much more than just the encyclical dealing with artificial contraception. It was going to defend everything, including the most basic teachings of the Catholic faith. And 1969 was the year that I began university. So it was my freshman year, and I was fortunate enough, I think it was Providence really, when I look back at it, that came to my aid in every regard here. I was fortunate enough to have some teachers. Perhaps later I'll mention something about a teacher whom I had who was an unexpected providential force in my life as well. But I had one very, very traditional-minded teacher in history, which was my major, who, as he became aware of my own position and my own shock over what it was that was taking place, he said to me, "I think you'd like to come to a meeting of this newly organized society." So he took me to Fordham University in 1970 to one of the early meetings of the Roman Forum, and it was in those days, which was the real beginning of the awareness of the changes that were taking place. In those days, those meetings were packed. They were really packed. We've gone through ups and downs in this regard, and especially since the internet, I mean, it's been much more difficult to attract live audiences to things that it was in those days. It was more in 1970 like the old, what did they call it, Chautauqua circuit of things, where you'd have William Jennings Bryan come to speak in a big tent, and then you get thousands of people to come to hear him. They were packed, those meetings, and I was overwhelmed by learning about the extent of the organization and then the depth of the knowledge of the people who were fighting in something that just a few years earlier I never dreamed that there could be fights about. Because what was happening as the rebellion became clear was something that was a real shock to people, because the church was an untouchable institution, even if you were part of the segment of the laity that ordinarily complained about it. You just never expected something like this could happen. So I knew that I wanted to be part of this. And again, I was fortunate in that von Hildebrand and his wife and William Mara and Vincent Michelli were all of them extremely eager to attract young people who wanted to take part in what was very, very swiftly becoming a very militant crusade. So William Mara, who was the basic day-to-day director of the organization, immediately became a close guide and friend. And he then took me very often to these regular meetings that he had at the von Hildebrand's apartment outside of New York in New Rochelle, very, very close at hand, because all of the founders there used to meet for a kind of coffee hour and dinner every week. So I had the good fortune of being able to talk to von Hildebrand. Von Hildebrand encouraged me in my historical studies, and they all of them said to me not to be too eager to take part in a way that stole time away from my studies in the militant activities of the organization, because it was more important for me to be formed. And they assured me that the battle was going to go on for a long time, so that I shouldn't look upon my studies as an undergraduate and then as a graduate student as somehow being an escape from the fight, which there would be plenty of time for me to participate in. So I met regularly with them. I was able to go to the meetings regularly in 1970, 71, 72. They gave me one task at the meetings. The meetings always ended with the singing of the Credo. And when they discovered that I was a singer, they gave me that job to do. But I met this extraordinary network of people, and then extraordinary network of speakers that came to the Roman Forum in those early years. Now, I moved on to Oxford in the fall of 1972. I had a strange senior year abroad at Oxford that was the real stimulator of my desire, the real stimulus of my desire to want to go to the university. And so I ended up continuing on there for my graduate studies. And the Roman Forum raised money for me to be able to do this as well. So I was indebted to them for that reason. But I was grateful that I was able, in going to Oxford in that period, to make the acquaintance of a young man who was making his name as a great defender of the Traditionalist movement at that time in London, Michael Davies. I met him at a mass at Westminster Cathedral that was able to be celebrated because of the fact that England was an engine for wanting to have permission for that mass, at least in England, to continue, as it was allowed to do, with especially what's popularly referred to as the Agatha Christie indult. So I was able to put Michael Davies in touch with the Roman Forum, and then he became a central contributor to everything. Chronologically, I've skipped a step because what intervened between when the Roman Forum was founded and then my contact with it in 1970, and then Michael Davies later on from 72 onwards being brought in to the whole thing, was the promulgation of the Novus Ordo and von Hildebrand's involvement here in Europe with the founding of Una Voce International. He wasn't the first catalyst for the foundation, but he very swiftly was involved. And the man who was the real engine of Una Voce was a German named Eric de Savanten, who then came to the United States in 1970 in order to have an opening meeting for Una Voce in New York. He gave a brilliant speech, by the way, at that time, in which he predicted everything that has happened with regard to a flourishing, new religious orders being created, and so on and so forth. And before de Savanten came over and von Hildebrand returned from the meeting that he took part in of Una Voce, when he returned, he gave a rousing address at Fordham University to an overflowing crowd, in which he said that the Novus Ordo was licit, he said, but horrible. And he said it was a horrible weakening of the teaching that was needed, not to speak of the beauty of the Mass. And he said that the Roman Forum had to be dedicated to the full restoration of the Roman liturgy. So from Humanae Vitae to the defense of the entirety of the faith, to a special concern for fighting for the defense of the traditional liturgy, you have all of the elements that were to be of concern to the organization. But what ended up happening then very, very swiftly was that we developed a very close contact with the newly founded journal, founded just 1 year before the Roman Forum, the Remnant. Walter Matt, the founder of the Remnant, had been the editor of the long-lasting journal of the Matt family, which was in German itself until the First World War, and then due to the unpleasantness of the First World War, culturally as well as in every other way, they had to change to English. But he was the editor of it, and he very quickly realized that there was a necessity to criticize what Pope Paul VI was doing on a practical level in many, many ways, culminating also in the promulgation of the Novus Ordo of the Mass, and the rest of the guiding, the board of the newspaper, The Wanderer, that he was the editor of, did not want to criticize Paul VI. They were perfectly happy to criticize erring priests and bishops, but they didn't want to criticize the Pope. When the Roman Forum was founded, it was presumed that the Wanderer was going to be the record of a movement in defense of the faith, and an organization called Catholics United for the Faith was going to be the tool for organizing on a parish level this opposition to any kind of rebelliousness. But Catholics United for the Faith didn't want to criticize the actions of popes either. So von Hildebrand said, "This is ridiculous. I mean, it is not the case that the Pope's infallible magisterium covers his entire pastoral activity, and all of history can demonstrate this." So we quickly made an alliance with the remnant. So it was the remnant and the Roman Forum, and then with Una Voce and with Michael Davies. And you have the entire gang, so to speak, together. And this is all before Archbishop Lefebvre had his problems with Rome. His problems with Rome come over the ordinations, and then Rome's real double dealing with him, because they had approved of his work up until the breakdown of their entente in 1974. And then with Archbishop Lefebvre on the scene, we had another element that we've always had a close relationship with the Society of St. Pius X, even if we were never part of the Society of St. Pius X. Our charism and our activity was academic, even if it touched upon everything ranging from theology to philosophy to liturgy. And so we were not associated in the same way with the society as we were with something like the Remnant, with which again I was happy to have a close contact with from the very beginning. I met Michael Matt, the current editor, when he was a kid, and I had extremely long curly hair in those days. And he said that I looked cool when he when he met me. So then we moved on, and then I came back from Oxford at the end of 1977, the beginning of 1978. Von Hildebrand was gone by that time, and Mara then more directly involved me in the activities of the organization. So I became a regular lecturer, along with this ever-expanding group of people. Among the early people who were involved with us from other countries were from Scotland, an extremely important figure by the name of Hamish Fraser. Hamish Fraser was one of the most active early fighters for the whole of the movement. And again, a man willing to take upon himself criticism where criticism was needed of priests and bishops and popes, in addition to the laity. Von Hildebrand and Mara, in this regard, in their dealings with all of their speakers, with all of us, their motto was, we do not excommunicate anybody who does not excommunicate us. We're willing to talk with everybody, and then, judge and see what it is that is good and what is not good. And I got such good advice from the very outset of my dealings with the Roman Forum. I think it was one of the first times I talked privately with von Hildebrand and Mara, and they told me not just that we don't excommunicate anyone who does not excommunicate us, but they said to me, remember that we're not in this battle to make points. We're in this battle for the truth. And we should have in our dealings with everybody a willingness to listen to see if what they're teaching or want to teach is the truth. And as a result of that, if we see that we're wrong in anything that we're saying, to be grateful for being corrected in this regard. So it was always a very welcoming organization. While I was away at Oxford, I missed the chance to hear Cardinal Mindszenty, who came to speak for the Roman Forum, That was one of the grandest occasions that they had. And of course, Cardinal Mindszenty was not exactly unwilling to criticize Paul VI, who forced him out of Hungary. So it went on in this way, with me ever more involved in the organization and speaking more and more all through the 70s and the 80s. And then in 1991, Dr. Mara told me I was now in charge of the Roman Forum. He said, I have too many speaking engagements. I need for you to be able to direct it. So that gave me the opportunity to do something which I had more and more seen to be needed with the organization, because as I was learning everything that I needed to learn, I became more and more convinced that what we were doing was good, but needed to be really added to, because it was reactive rather than giving solid, substantive formation in a way that was desperately needed. So in other words, it was as though we were all there, and the people who were the movers and shakers in the Catholic Church were the ones who were progressives and in charge. And what happened is that they made the moves and we reacted to them. We criticized them. We tried to refute them. And I got the feeling that we were utilizing the word traditionalist more and more without really forming a population that understood what the full tradition was all about. And as a result of that, risked very, very seriously baptizing a lot of things as part of the Catholic tradition, which were not part of the Catholic tradition, just customs that they were deeply attached to. And it was Walter Matt of the Remnant who very early on, before I even went off to Oxford, gave me the task of investigating something which he said American Catholics were much too attached to, and that was the divinization of the entire American system, which they then baptized as Catholic when it was not. So he was the one who got me involved in dealing with Americanism, which has been a main theme in what I've worked on through my life. And I saw that this is something that extended still further. So I wanted the Roman Forum not to give up its work of refuting all kinds of heretical actions in church life, and not giving up its work for the defense of the traditional Mass, but I wanted it to get engaged in a substantive teaching and learning of the whole tradition. So that's why we came up with this idea of a program in New York City, a substantive program in New York City from September to May that would, to begin with, focus on teaching the entire history of the church, beginning as soon as we possibly could begin, but then doing the same thing and expanding upon it and getting non-Americans involved in the picture by taking the show on the road and spending a few weeks a year in a place that we could have at least the memory of the entirety of Catholic culture to use as an environment in which to carry out this work. And in which what we could do is initiate people into a time out of time where they lived for 2 weeks doing all manner of Catholic things, having a Catholic fraternal life with a full Catholic liturgy, eating together as Catholics and eating and drinking good food and wine together as Catholics, singing together as Catholics, being introduced to folkloric elements rooted in Catholic culture, and then taking this back home and comparing it with a culture which was primarily formed by Protestantism. So that was the genesis of this program here in Italy, and also the accompanying program in New York. To introduce this, what happened is that when I took over, I happened by just circumstance in 1991 to find the Institute of Christ the King in Griciliano. I knew nothing about it, but there was a friend of mine who was interested in going to Griciliano, and we were traveling together. My wife, our current chaplain, who was not a priest at the time, Father Richard Munkold, and some other friends. And we were traveling together, and this potential seminarian said, I want to go to visit Griciliano. So we went to visit Griciliano, were welcomed with open arms there, and talking with Monsignor Voce said, well, why don't we have some grand liturgical ceremony in New York at which we can introduce what you're trying to do? So he managed to get Cardinal Alphonse Stickler, the former head of the Vatican Library, to come together with a group from Griciliano to New York in February of 1992, where we had the first solemn pontifical traditional mass that was celebrated in New York since heaven knows when, certainly the period before they began making the changes that led to the Novus Ordo from basically 1965 onwards. And that was a magnificent event in St. Agnes in the latter part of February of 1992 with over 1,000 people attending, and with Cardinal Stickler giving a set of lectures for a week at this Jesuit Chinese missionary center, which offered a home for a lot of us who were fighting the traditional cause, something called the Chinese American Amity Fund. And he came to lecture there. And then we moved on to do what we do here now. So we decided that after the ceremony, we could begin the planning for what we wanted to do in both these places. But I had been coming to Gardone since 1984, just because I loved the place, but because I wanted to see this national monument here, the Vittoriale. Not a terribly Catholic figure involved, Gabriele D'Annunzio, to say the least. But I fell in love with the place. And we were used to coming here and visiting. So we all came here in 1991 after Cardinal Stickler's visit in order to try to determine where we would have the program. And none of us can remember who said, well, why don't we just have it here? Because we know here and we know the people here and everything. So we've done this now. And so from that point forward, we carried through. From 1992, down to just a couple of years ago, we spent 32 years in New York talking about Catholic history and culture and everything contributing to it, from the pre-Christian period, from talking about ancient Israel and then the Hellenic world. We covered the whole scope down to just recently, 32 years. And what that was a fraternal learning experience for all of us in the fullness of Catholic culture. And then we paralleled it here, but expanded on it a bit more after 2008, so that we could allow for the contributions of a wide variety of people from different European countries to take part in it, so that it's expanded to what it is now, with speakers over the course of these days from Australia, from Spain, from France, from Hungary, from Poland, from Italy, from Austria, from Germany, from Belgium, from England, from Ireland, from all over the place. And it's by being placed on tapes, and now thankfully with the help of the Catholic Family News videos as well, to be shown on the internet. To have a scope which I never dreamed would be possible. So I hope that these tapes can reach very, very far and wide, and I hope that they can reach also to the man who was the provincial of an Augustinian who came here for probably about 20 years and who emailed me with a great sign of hope the day of the election of his former provincial as Pope, when he told me that he went to this provincial for permission to say to the traditional Mass and was greeted by that provincial, the current Pope, Leo XIV, with no objection at all whatsoever to doing so. So I'm hoping that maybe even perhaps Pope Leo will listen to one of these someday.